First of all, thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time today, whether it's early morning, like it is for me here in Colorado, the US, or it's late afternoon, as it is for probably most of you all in Sweden. My name is Nicole Forsberg. Or actually Nicole Shepherd nowadays. Just changed my last name a few days ago here. I will be your moderator today. Really excited for this opportunity. As many of you all know, Christer Bergman is the executive director for SIREUS. He was visiting his son here in Colorado, actually, over the weekend, and he told me that there's a specific bug that wanted to travel with him back to DC that attacked his throat. So he actually, unfortunately, can't be with us today. He is under the weather quite a bit. So I told Christer on behalf of him to wish you all welcome on behalf of SIREUS. And also for those of you that don't know about SIREUS, I'll just mention a few words here. So SIREUS is an organization that's part of the Swedish American Chamber of Commerce in the US, with a mission to promote knowledge exchange within research and innovation and academia in general, talent mobility as well between Swedish and American universities. So it's under the SIREUS umbrella that we gather today. And so thank you so much, SIREUS, for this opportunity, and also the Swedish American Chamber of Commerce in the US. A little bit about myself. Nicole Shepherd, as I mentioned, I have one leg in both of the countries. For those of you that don't know me, I'm half American, half Swedish. I've been involved in both of the ecosystems in research and innovation the past 12 years or so. Started my career in Sweden, doing business development for high-tech companies in the clean tech space and also medical device. Since the past 8 years, I've been actively involved in spinning out research into startups or research commercialization, if you will. Today, I'm with the University of Colorado Boulder Venture Partners. We're the research commercialization arm of the university. But before joining CU Boulder about a little more than 5 years ago, I was actually with KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. Not sure if we have any KTH people here, but certainly active in that space. So I have seen research commercialization both from the Swedish perspective and the US perspective, and I just find us gathering today being extremely exciting because there is so much knowledge that can be shared between the two countries. So I'm really excited for our discussions later on. And so SIREUS Research Forum is a newly launched initiative. Many of you might have been at the first introductory session with Dr. Maria Brogren and Sofia Cedergren from the US Embassy in Sweden and STAR, Swedish Transatlantic Research. I forget the last letter, but collaborating, putting together Swedish and American researchers. So the purpose of this series is actually to gather best practices and share knowledge between each other on the topic of Swedish and American sort of research and innovation practices. And I was asked to find a couple experts on this topic. And of course, the first person that I did think about was Dr. Stephen Susalka, who is our distinguished speaker today. He is the CEO of AUTM, the Association of University Technology Managers. Actually, now it's only AUTM, which is a very, very large organization that gathers universities, hospitals, other research institutions, corporations that are heavy in research and development to focus on sort of best practices on how you actually bring research to market, which is how new research can have a very large impact in society, and we'll just dive into this really, really deeply today. Dr. Susalka has a background in bringing research to market from various entities, but the past 9 years or so, he has been the CEO of AUTM and really been the face of tech transfer for the entire United States. He is involved in decision making and policy on Capitol Hill, so really influential in the regulatory landscape, but also is a voice for um, hundreds, actually thousands. Stephen, you will speak about this soon. Professionals in this space that really help bring research to market through commercialization. And so before I put Dr. Stephen Susalka here on stage, I just wanted to say, for those of you that missed it in the beginning, you all are default on mute right now, and apologies for this, but there's a purpose for that. We're going to fully focus on Stephen's presentation here for about a half an hour or so, and then we're going to give you all the opportunity to ask any pressing questions that you might have. I'm suspecting that there will be a lot of them. So if you have any questions afterwards, please press the button raise hand, and myself or the SIREUS team will make sure that you are unmuted and your camera can go on. And so it's almost like we're meeting in person, and ask any questions that you might have. So without further ado, thank you so much, everyone. Very excited for this presentation. Stephen, the stage is yours. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll do the virtual claps here. Just imagine a whole room of people putting on stage.
Fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you so much for that very kind introduction, Nicole. And thank you, SIREUS, for the invitation to speak about something that I am absolutely passionate about, and that is technology transfer. So for those of you that might not know about our organization, I'll go right here. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of who we are. So Nicole did a great job describing it. We're a nonprofit organization, and we are really focused on educating, promoting, and inspiring the tech transfer professionals like the Nicoles of the world that are changing the world by bringing early stage innovations into the products and services of tomorrow. So as Nicole mentioned, we are a pretty large organization. We've got about 3,000 members. We're an individual member organization. So for example, Nicole's a member, not the University of Colorado Boulder. So we've got about 3,000 members, but those members hail from, about 800 different universities, institutions, teaching hospitals, companies, government labs. So we have a nice breadth of experience in our profession. So AUTM, all those 3,000 people are really united under a single mission, and that is we at AUTM support and advance knowledge or technology transfer, depending where you are in the world, worldwide. That is what we are focused on doing. That is absolutely essential. I know in speaking with Nicole that many of you are very familiar with the process, but even if you're not, technology transfer has changed your life. Regardless whether you know anything about it or not. And I'll just give a couple of quick examples. For those of you that might suffer from seasonal allergies, you can thank Georgetown University because they're the ones that actually came up with the active ingredient that's in Allegra today. Similarly, if you are one of those parents that have kids that do not like getting shots and would rather a nasal flu vaccine, you could thank the St. Louis School of Medicine, University of Michigan, for the development of Flu Mist. If you've got a family member that's trying to kick tobacco and they've used the nicotine patch, you could thank UCLA. And for all of us that have on our phones some version of Siri or voice activated AI, that was developed at DARPA in the United States. So these, and then, it's not just health technologies, it's not just IT technologies, it's everything. So I put up here Covington sweet potato that was developed at NC State. I could have added things like Honeycrisp apples out of Minnesota, and the list goes on and on and on. All of those are technology transfer success stories. And so here at AUTM, our goal is to support and advance that technology transfer across the entire world. And so in the United States, we really were kicked off by the 1980 passage of the Bayh-Dole Act. So the Bayh-Dole Act, named after Birch Bayh and Bob Dole, a Democrat and a Republican that came together that recognized that so much of our innovation in the United States is funded by the federal government, as it's funded in Sweden and other countries around the world, was not actually being driven to market at the speed and efficiency that it could. And so it was the passage of the Bayh-Dole Act that allowed, for the first time, universities to retain the rights to inventions created on their campus and be responsible for commercializing those innovations that were funded with federal dollars, either in whole or in part. And the university was responsible for advancing that. As you can see on the left, The Economist said possibly the most inspired piece of legislation to be enacted in America over the past half century. Big words, but honestly, the data bears that out. So I wanted to talk to you a little further about technology transfer. And so whenever we think about technology transfer and the development of innovations into the products and services of tomorrow, you got to think, where does it start? And it all starts with research. So one of the things AUTM's been doing since 1991, I'll talk about a little later, is we have been collecting data from US institutions, nonprofit research institutions across the country. And so in our latest licensing survey, for which we have full data, 2022, we found there was about $92 billion in total research expenditures. So you had all this research occurring on these campuses. Along the way, and so of that $92 billion, you could actually see the breakdown of where that money is coming from. So the blue line at the top is federal funding. And as you can see, the majority of research funding in the United States, much like the rest of the world, comes from the federal government. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that that line is decreasing over time. Yes, there have been a couple of bumps. This is real data. But you can see that the majority of research is funded by the federal government, but it is declining from a percentage basis. From a dollar basis, it's increasing, but from a percentage basis, it's decreasing. If I draw your attention to the red dots at the bottom, that's industry funding. And what you'll see is from 1991 to 2022, that number has been just about 8% for decades. That really has not moved. Where we're seeing movement is in everything else. So these would be state level investments. These would be private foundation investments. These would be internal research investments by those institutions. So that's kind of how the breakdown in the United States looks like. And you can see on the right the actual percentages in 2022. Okay, so you got lots of universities doing lots of research, the majority of it funded by the federal government. That leads to inventions. And again, if we go back to our AUTM data, what we find is there's about 24,000 inventions that were developed across the US nonprofit research entities in 2022. You could actually do a little math there and say, all right, cost $91.8 billion, and we received 24,000 inventions. That works out to about $3.8 million per invention. Now, of course, the research is not being developed solely to develop inventions. However, over time, inventions do occur. Now, the reason I attach these two, research leads to inventions, is because there is a straight line comparing research to innovations. And I could actually show it to you here. So here what you're looking at is a graph looking at the number of invention disclosures in the United States from, again, our AUTM survey. And you can see that's in red. And then in blue, you can see research expenditures, how much money those institutions are spending on research. And you could see, again, real data, but you can see those numbers track very, very tightly. Now, of course, right around COVID, things are getting a little wonky, but you can see generally those numbers are neck and neck. As research funding increases, inventions increase. So that's the first really important point. Probably should be no surprise to anybody watching this, but there's the data that actually supports that. Okay, so research leads to inventions. Then you get to tech transfer. And so here is kind of my one slide overview of tech transfer. Clearly, as Nicole knows, and many of you, tech transfer is way more complicated. But if I really wanted to summarize what tech transfer is, and the issue around tech transfer, it is that universities, research institutions, hospitals, you could put them all in the same bucket, they invent technologies. However, you do not buy Allegra from Georgetown University. You don't buy Honeycrisp apples from the University of Minnesota. You buy those from companies. And that in itself is the issue around tech transfer. So you need to take those early stage innovations developed at institutions that don't create products and license them out to companies that will develop them into the products and services of tomorrow. So if you dive into this just a little more, what does that mean, right? So that is the process of the core of technology transfer is taking that invention, evaluating the invention. So is it protectable? Is it commercializable? If so, protecting the invention, often with patents, could be copyrights, know-how, different types of intellectual property protection. And then commercializing that, meaning identifying a partner that will take that early stage innovation and turn that into that product or service of tomorrow. So that's tech transfer as an overview. In our experience, tech transfer really has kind of it's a three-legged stool, and it needs all three of these things to have the best shot at being developed into that product or service of tomorrow by licensing it to a company. So you can imagine of the 24,000 inventions, not all of them are going to be licensed. And so what will up the chance of that invention being picked up by a company where that company then develops that invention further into that product? First thing is IP protection. In the absence of IP protection, it's really hard to advance innovations forward. This isn't a absolute, but it is one of those things that you really do need strong intellectual property protection to provide an incentive to those companies to support your invention. The second thing that's really important, as should be no surprise, it needs to have commercial potential. There are plenty of interesting inventions that might be applicable for IP protection. However, don't really have a commercial need. There's not a need in the marketplace. So you need to make sure you have that potential. Of course, that makes sense. The third thing that we're seeing more and more is companies are moving farther and farther away from a risky early stage technology to a more developed a de-risk technology. So we're seeing more and more universities, hospitals, research institutions across the United States investing in developing those early stage innovations just a little farther, doing more proofs of concept to make that of value and interest to those companies that will ideally license downstream. So that's kind of the three legs of what's required for successful tech transfer. If we keep going here, so I mentioned research, I mentioned inventions. That then leads to licenses. And so again, in 2022 alone, we saw almost 8,000 license and option agreements. What does that mean? That means there were about 8,000 opportunities where an early stage innovation was contractually provided to a company to develop into that product and service of tomorrow. So you can see here how research leads to inventions, which then leads to licenses. And that's kind of the critical role of technology transfer and the route by which it occurs. So, I talked generally about tech transfer. So that's kind of, sort of core tech transfer. So one of the things Nicole asked me to do is say, kind of what are the trends? What's on the horizon for the profession? And so, there are kind of four things I wanted to bring up in this case. So first up, I wanted to highlight that technology transfer, at least in the United States, and we're seeing it in other countries as well, has expanded from just patent licensing. So it's not just, hey, I have an invention, let's file a patent on it, let's license the patent. It's expanded, and then once that patent is licensed to a company, that's kind of the end of tech transfer. That's not how tech transfer works now. And so to give you an example, here's kind of the core of tech transfer that I mentioned earlier, right? You have an invention. The invention is provided to the tech transfer office. The tech transfer office then evaluates, protects, commercializes that invention, and then they license it to a third-party company that develops that into a product. That's sort of the core. What we're seeing is technology transfer is now broadening in both directions. And so what I mean by that is you are seeing more and more corporate engagement on the front end. So that is, you're seeing tech transfer offices reach out to the companies in their areas, companies that might be local to the university, and bringing them into the institution and saying, hey, we have all of these resources. We have brilliant scientists. We have amazing resources and access to very important and specialized equipment. What can we do to answer your challenge in your industry? So you're actually seeing tech transfer reach out to companies before the creation of an invention has even begun. So that's kind of on the corporate engagement side. On the tech transfer side, I mentioned this earlier, you're seeing more and more investment in de-risking those technologies. So the days of receiving an invention disclosure, protecting it, and then trying to license that out, that still happens, but you're seeing more and more institutions that are now investing in those technologies to prove that the technologies work at the level they expect. So you've got some proof of concept funding being developed for that. Another thing we're seeing in tech transfer generally is there's a focus beyond just patentable innovations, right? And so you're seeing things on the copyright side. You're seeing things on the social entrepreneurship side. So tech transfer is broadened from just patentable innovations. And I think this is really important and great for the public. You're also seeing that tech transfer is having greater incorporation throughout the entire institution. So rather than just a single office that you only visit when you have an invention, what you're seeing is that tech transfer office is being involved in developments across the campus, whether that's helping to train the next generation of scientists, because intellectual property is a key element of their future, whether it is creation of new startup companies that we'll talk about in a little bit. All of these areas are things that the tech transfer office is well capable of pursuing in an institutional environment. So the next thing that we're seeing more and more of is that of startup companies. So I mentioned earlier, you have an invention, you protect it, you then license it out to, say, an existing company. Well, often we're seeing that those innovations are so cutting edge that there is literally no company to license to. And I'll give one example, CRISPR Therapeutics. So you guys are aware of the gene editing technology CRISPR. When that invention was developed, I presume that they looked for gene editing companies that would be interested in this great gene editing technology. Well, it turns out there are no gene editing companies. So instead, there was the development of companies like CRISPR Therapeutics that are startup companies that are developed to advance these nascent technologies that are, world changing at a very early stage. So you see investment in startup companies. In the US, we're seeing tech transfer offices that have departments of those offices that are focused solely on venture development. All they do is develop companies, help get the right leadership team, and drive those companies forward. That is then having the knock-on effect of creating more local economic development. So one of our research areas is identifying that it turns out 72% of all startup companies reside in the state in which that technology was invented. That makes a ton of sense, right? You want to be close to the founders of the technology. But that means there's economic development occurring because now you've got that tax base in the area, often in the same exact city of that university. So I just wanted to highlight the evolution of tech transfer. So if broadening from patent licensing only is one of them, there are others. And another one that we're seeing, and we're seeing this play out in real time, is the need for Autumn and tech transfer professionals to defend the intellectual property system. And so Autumn has been very active in supporting technology transfer. And we have found that it's important to raise this to the highest levels of government in the United States. So, for example, on the left is Senator Chris Coons. He's a Democrat. And on the right side, you have Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina. Chris Coons, Senator Coons is from Delaware. You've got Senator Tom Tillis from North Carolina, Republican. Innovation is one of those things that is bipartisan. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. It is good for the public. It is good for Delaware. It is good for North Carolina. And so these are areas that we are trying to impress upon legislators to make sure that we continue to support technology transfer and create a robust, strong intellectual property ecosystem, which allows us to take those federally funded, many times federally funded innovations and turn them into the future of our country and frankly, worldwide. So advocating for tech transfer is becoming more and more important. A third area is diversifying that innovation ecosystem. The USPTO, the United States Patent and Trademark Office, has been looking at this and has found that, unfortunately, men are overrepresented in inventors of US patent applications. Now, we're effectively 50-50 men, women, yet the vast majority of innovators are men. And so one of the things that we need to be cognizant of is diversifying that innovation ecosystem and capturing those innovations that might come from people that might not be the typical inventors that we've had in the past. So, I think innovation should be probably 50-50, just like population is. So that's an area. You can also see this diversification across the entire institution, the entire country. One of the things we say at Autumn often is innovation happens everywhere, but it's only commercialized where funded. And so what do I mean by that? So again, innovation's happening everywhere right now today. But if those other universities don't have tech transfer offices, they don't have investment in filing patent applications, those innovations will just wither on the vine. So to invest in those is to allow further diversification of our innovation ecosystem. All right. A fourth thing that is just a continuation of what we're seeing is the growth of startup companies. And that is leading to an economic engine. And so we have been following data on the impact of academic innovation into, say, GDP, jobs created. And as you can imagine, one leads to the other. And so in addition to startups, which result in more companies, more jobs in your community, you're also seeing the creation of, look at all the products I've already named, and the economic impact they're having, as well as the societal benefit they're providing across the globe. Okay, so that's a bunch of stuff on technology transfer, the evolution of tech transfer. What I wanted to wrap up before I turn it back over to Nicole for any questions is, how can Autumn help support you? And help support your institutions. And so I want to share a couple of key resources that we have, some of which would be beneficial be an Autumn member. Others you could actually access right now today. One of which is our licensing survey data. So again, these are the things I referred to earlier. We've been collecting data on this in the United States for 30 plus years. We've been collecting in Canada as well. And it allows us a nice baseline for where we are and then where we're going in terms of intellectual property. So, and that's all recorded in what we call the STAT database, which houses all this information. We can then take that data and we can actually create infographics like the one you see on the left that actually can highlight the impact of innovation. And so here you can kind of see, this is back the 2021 infographic, you could actually see research expenditures leads to inventions, which leads to patent applications and so on. Really effective messaging tool for both leadership at your institution as well as the federal government. And one of the things we can then do is say, okay, well, we now know how many new products are created a year. We know how much royalty was generated across all these different inventions. And then we can actually calculate that there's been an effect over a 25-year period in the United States alone of over $1 trillion to the gross domestic product, GDP. That has been expanded even further if you look at gross output to 1.9 trillion and has led to 6.5 million jobs. So you can actually see not only is tech transfer great because it provides those needed products and societal benefit, it has an economic impact on top of that. Okay, another resource that we have that might be valuable is what we call the Autumn Innovation Marketplace, or AIM. And so AIM is a collection of innovations from all of our different campuses. So for example, if you were interested in the innovations at the University of Colorado Boulder, you could go to their website. Great, and please do that. What we thought was, why don't we actually take all of those different websites and have all the innovations in one place? So here you can see, there are 31,000 technologies available for licensing. So in one fell swoop, you can review all of them. I pulled this yesterday. So notice these are not technologies that are 10 years old. They're things that were posted yesterday. And again, 31,000 of these technologies available. Another thing that Autumn does is, I mentioned we educate and we promote and inspire. One of our promote pillars is we want to highlight the impact that tech transfer has on you. I mentioned a number of examples earlier. N95 mask is another one. We actually have something called the Better World Project that houses many hundreds of tech transfer success stories. So here you can see, 514 stories at last count. And so you could go here right now today and highlight those innovations. One of the calls I'll make to you is, at your institution, do you have a better world project you'd like to share with us? Something that's made a better world for us due to innovation. We'd love to post that on our website too. Turn this to 515, 550, 600 stories. So I encourage you to do that. Then the last thing I wanted to mention before I stop for questions is the tech transfer profession generally. So very few people go to school to become a tech transfer professional. You usually come in either with a science background, a business background, or a legal background. And so one of the things that Autumn did is we worked with a number of other national tech transfer organizations from around the world to create the Alliance for Tech Transfer Professionals. And we created a designation called the Registered Tech Transfer Professional designation, or RTTP. So for your institutions that are growing your tech transfer and want more accreditation and recognition for what you're doing, I encourage you to check out RTTP and the Alliance to see how we can better support you. So with that, let me thank you. And please feel free to reach out to me with any questions. You can tell I'm passionate about this, and anything I could do to help support you and your organization as we create those new products, I am here to help you. So with that, let me turn this back over to Nicole. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephen. This was very interesting, and virtual applause here. For sure. I see. Yes, they're coming in here virtually as well. Thank you so much. Yeah, I wanted to comment a little bit as well, being in both of the ecosystems here of all the valuable information that Steve mentioned. At the University of Colorado Boulder, at Venture Partners, and a lot of my colleagues across the University of Colorado system, we use AUTM in our team, and specifically the deals database that Stephen mentioned, probably on a daily basis, certainly a weekly basis, as we interact with companies and startups as well. Anybody that is looking to license our IP, it is just so valuable to know what the typical industry standards are, because it's negotiation at the end of the day, right? And AUTM just really gives us the tools where we know that a deal is, well, this is actually a fair deal. It's important to, when you just negotiate, you have to start somewhere that's reasonable, because otherwise it's hard to dig yourself out of that. So I just wanted to say a shout out that is just probably one of the top resources among the others that we do use. So for any one of you that is in tech transfer, I know there are a lot of them in the audience here in Sweden. That is just, yeah, a really wonderful resource. And I remember when I moved to the US a little more than 5 years ago, the AUTM annual meeting was actually the first event that I went to, and I got fully immersed in the profession and the ecosystem around the world, but mainly in the US, because it is very different from the Swedish ecosystem. And I would love to have some discussion about this as well in our Q&A if we have time. But yeah, just wanted to put that out there. And Steve, I don't know if you mentioned the annual meeting. I know it's tight deadline, but if anybody does have the opportunity or if anybody's interested and has the opportunity, AUTM is hosting their annual meeting in San Diego this year. I believe it's coming up in about a month right now. But it's a gathering of, did you say it was 3,000 people now, Steve? It was,
Yeah, so it's about 2,000 people. So February
2000.
18th through the 21st in San Diego. And this is shaping up to be our largest annual meeting ever. And so we anticipate well over 2,000 people. And so those are tech transfer professionals, the Nicoles of the world, from universities across the United States, as well as probably 30, 40 in 40 countries around the world as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I will say, and exactly as Steve mentioned, and a lot of industry is there as well. It's big pharma and it's quantum companies. So it's really a gathering of the actors that make this happen, bring these inventions to market. With that said, I'm going to open up for Q&A. For anybody interested, please feel free to raise your hand. Lars, awesome. That I know that you probably have some exciting questions. You are actually one of the, let's see there, you are bringing tech to market. If you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yeah, I think I did. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, great.
Yeah. Hi, good to see you, Nicole. And everyone, I know maybe a few names more there. First time I meet you. Nice to see you, and great overview of the space. Very exciting. Thank you for doing this. So I'm a scientist, background from Sweden, and came to US many more years than 5 years ago, like Nicole did. And I was a faculty researcher at Boston University, and licensed or actually acquired IP from them that came out of my lab. So I'm a co-inventor of this technology, started a company. We are now scale up, so we are doing quite well. It's an interesting journey. So I walked this walk to some extent, but I'm also very much interested in tech transfer in general, having sort of lived some of the challenges that's been over the years, and appreciating the difficulty from sort of the business development side and the academic side, and try to build that bridge to make this work well. But I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about, that Sweden is on the top of innovation and invention in the world in various ways, as I'm sure you're aware. And the system there allows the inventor to keep the technology, whereas here in the US and most other countries, it's the institution that sort of has the IP rights. Can you talk a little bit about that, pros and cons, and what, from your perspective, you think Is there something to it that Sweden is doing it in the other way that sort of relates to why they're so efficiently being able to do it in Sweden, seemingly?
Sure. Yeah. So great question. And first of all, congratulations. It is not easy to take an invention to market, and especially the startup route. And so, the fact that you were able to do that really says a lot about you and the team that you built around you. So congratulations on that. So you're exactly right. So in the United States, as a condition of employment, you as a professor, as you know at BU, would assign those rights to the institution, and the institution would then own that intellectual property. Although according to the Bayh-Dole Act, you would receive a portion of royalties that arise out of the commercialization of your invention. So there's still an incentive for you. And so, as you rightly point out, that is the preferred model in terms of institution owned. You have some areas of the world, Canada as an example, where it actually differs by institution. There are some institutions in Canada that are inventor owned and others that are institution owned. So there's actually, I think of that as sort of like a hybrid system between the two of them. So you mentioned the innovative nature of the Swedish research system, which is very true, and so that's been documented by WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, and others. One of the things I'd be interested, I haven't been able to dig into the data, is okay. So the innovations are created. Are they turned into products and services and startup companies downstream? And so that would, to me, be an interest. And so Nicole did a great job of describing me, but by background, I've got a PhD in neuroscience. So, I like to kind of just follow the data on that, right? And so, one of the things I'd be interested in is the percentage of commercialization similar, better, worse than those areas where it is not inventor owned? And I'm not commenting one way or the other on what's better. I'm just curious on the data.
Yeah,
That's
very interesting. I wasn't aware of that those data weren't available yet, but I'd be very curious as well about that. Thank you. I'm in the neuroscience space as well, so I'm reaching out to you on LinkedIn. We got to chat more, I think.
Fantastic. Well, hey, if you want to talk about phosphorylated subunits of microtubule motors, I'm your guy, or was. All right, looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Lars, for bringing up that question. That's actually something that I did expect come up because of the legislation in Sweden, since that has been, for anyone of you that don't know, it's called the professor's privilege. It's a law that's been in the works since the 1950s in Sweden, where, yeah, the inventor has the legal right to their invention. I've seen both ecosystems. I won't elaborate on this too much, but it would actually be interesting to have a full session just to share best practices in the different models, because I think there are benefits to both, and there are, of course, drawbacks for both as well. But yeah, overall, I think it's up to, yeah, we'll park that for actually a separate discussion. But I think a lot of it is up to how effectively the individual universities manage inventions that come in. In Sweden, for instance, if there's a large inspirational kind of engine in the TTO to encourage faculty to invent, that brings in a large influx of invention disclosures, which will help the innovation ecosystem thrive. Whereas I think when you have it by law in the US, that happens just naturally because you have to disclose your invention by law. So but yeah, on and on and on.
Nicole, if I could just add one other thing, because Lars brought up that point and then you added to it. So, one of the other aspects is scientists are brilliant and they are excellent in their field. They know their field. Now, that doesn't mean that they are business people at heart. And so, that is sometimes a challenge. And Lars, you might have experienced this as well. Not every scientist can make the transition. And so therefore, when you've got the support of the office, and so the venture development arm of your institution to help support you through that, So you take the best of the scientists, the research, and then you pair them with the business executives needed to drive things forward. Sometimes that might be more efficient. And that's not to say that it can't happen all the time or it doesn't ever happen, but it can accelerate that. So just wanted to share that. Back to you, Nicole.
Yeah. Appreciate that, Stephen. Absolutely. Let's see, Peter Frank, I see from Lund here, I see you have a question. I did enable your mic, so hopefully you'll be able to unmute yourself as well.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Yes, Peter Frank from Lund University. So I work at the tech transfer office here. I thought that it would be interesting if you could talk a bit about what typical licensees are for licenses in tech transfer offices in the US, because generally in Sweden we say that it's quite hard for us to get a researcher with an invention and then maybe do a patent application and then get someone to pay licenses for that. So it would be interesting to hear a little bit more about what typical licensees are.
Gotcha. And so by what typical licensees are, do you mean the size of the company, the area of the company? Give me some.
Yeah, kind of, and both, because generally we can say that in Sweden it's very common that the industry is part of research projects. And in those projects, then of course the IP in the research project is a bit regulated from the start. But when researchers come to us with, and there has not been industry involved in the projects, then we sometimes say that it's hard to find the right part for you to license it to. So that was, so yes, a bit when someone just comes with research results, and who generally buys it? Is it the large companies, or is it small companies, or is it startups, or is it the researcher as self?
Yep, got it. Okay, so there's a ton right there that we could talk about. Let me get into some. Nicole, feel free to cut me off anytime on this one, because I've got lots of thoughts on this one. So let's kind of start with who's interested in licensing and when. So what I had mentioned was, I say in the old days of the 80s, 80s, 90s, the tech transfer office would be involved when an invention was created. So a researcher on campus would come up with something and say, hey, I've got an invention. This might fit a need for somebody. And so, Peter, you're running into this in your office, it sounds like. Well, you have that invention. Does any company have that exact need? And I kind of think of it like two needles trying to line up, right? So the company has a very unique problem that they need solved. The invention is a very unique solution for a problem, and you kind of need to line them up. And they often don't line up exactly. Right. So it's like, well, I kind of need to do it this way or that way. I need a different coding. I need a different manufacturing system. So it doesn't totally line up. And that can be solved along the way. Right. So and you've probably experienced this with developing, but it's a little more of a push in terms of getting that technology out of the university. What we're seeing again more of is that corporate engagement in the front end, which Peter, I think is what you were describing, which is the university actually gets together with the company, and the company says, tell you what, I've got this challenge. I cannot do this. And then the university says, well, we've got capability that can solve that. Why don't we work together? And maybe it's through sponsored research to develop that innovation. Now, when that innovation is developed, the chance of those two things lining up is much closer. And it's much closer because it's actually being directed from the beginning as opposed to the end, right? So that's kind of one area. So we're seeing a lot more of people trying to engage earlier for more directed research. So I think that's really important. For those technologies that are already in process, you're seeing, I mentioned that de-risking of technologies. You see tech transfer officers going to companies saying, what do you need to see to show that that technology works? And they'll say, well, I need to make sure it works in this particular model system. I need to make sure it can be scaled at this level. And so those are de-risking experiments that a tech transfer office can do to kind of move that down the technology readiness level. You might have heard that phrase, TRLs. You move it down that pipeline. So that's another way you do this to get an existing company to be interested. all that, so that's all true what I said, but there's another part of this, and that is you've all heard about the valley of death, right? So university technology gets to a certain phase, and then a company picks it up at another phase, but there's a valley in between, and that valley is expanding. So we are seeing large companies. So back to your question, Peter, we're seeing large companies moving farther and farther down the TRL level, right? They want more and more developed technology, and a university can only bring it so far. So what is going to bridge that? And so in the United States, it's startup companies. Startup companies are those companies that are high risk, high reward companies that will take an early stage technology, again, CRISPR therapeutics as just one very notable example, and will develop that technology likely to a stage where if it's successful, they will be acquired by a larger company. So to answer another aspect of your question, Peter, we see the majority of our licenses are not to large companies. They're to small and medium enterprise companies. And it's because they are more interested in areas that there might be more risk, but more reward. Whereas a company says, I got 4,000 ideas of new products. I don't need 4,001 that's super risky. Does that make sense? And happy to dig into this in any more detail, but that's kind of how we're seeing a lot of this go forward. So you're seeing those startup companies being acquired downstream by the larger companies once they've proven that technology is developed. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you. And it's quite similar to what we advise, I would say, because we say that licensing is quite hard since it's only selling a paper. And if you build a startup around it, then you have something more to sell.
Yep.
Yeah, excellent.
Well
and I'll, thank you so much. And I'll actually add to Stephen's, explain it, of course, from what he sees. Myself with like, in one institution with boots on the ground, this is exactly what we see at University of Colorado Boulder too. We used to be called the Technology Transfer Office. Now we're venture partners because we are moving from doing almost only licenses to industry directly to, we're very, very venture heavy now. So most of our, or a large part, I should say, of our licensing deals on an annual basis are exactly what Stephen pointed out to, is startups. And it's exactly because of that appetite from industry. That's less risk. University can only go so far. So we're putting in a lot of mechanisms of non-dilutive funding from the state, and from the federal government to bridge this gap and do an entrepreneurial training and a ton that I already know you all do in Sweden a lot as well. So it's interesting. Excellent. Let's see, Jonas, I am going to unmute you. Let's see there. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, seems to work. Thank you. Jonas Rimbeck, Innovation Advisor at Grants Innovation Office at University of Gothenburg here in Sweden. Also RTTP certified, actually. So thank you, Stephen, for the work with ATTP.
Congratulations.
Also SAC USA trainee alumni as well. So a lot on the CV. I was thinking about the thing we talked about with the teachers exemption and the ownership of IP and so on. So my question is basically, have the researchers in the US the possibility to sign an agreement with the institution to get the ownership of the IP? And if so, how common is that?
Yep. So great question. So it depends on an institution by institution basis. Generally, what happens is, and I believe Lars rolled off, but it happens sort of more the way Lars described it, which is an invention is developed, again, US focus, invention is developed, it's owned by BU, and the inventor says, I'd like to build a company around that. As Nicole said, that is often a very attractive route. Especially when you're talking about the scientists that developed it initially, as long as they've got the business expertise within or around them to drive forward. So often you see more likely, you'll see that license will occur. So a license to an exclusive license to the entire intellectual property package is licensed to that company to start up this company. So you see that more frequently. I have seen it the other way though, what you described. that, which is the university or the inventor says, I would like ownership back of my intellectual property. There are a couple of challenges to that. So number one is since it's an asset of the institution needs to do what's best for the institution. And so if that is perhaps provided to the inventor, okay, great. It might be, well, hey, Pfizer's interested. Well, that might be a more attractive model. And again, I'm sure there are politics and everything like that. So it's another challenge. The other thing I just wanted to mention, and this might be more unique to United States institutions, we have public institutions and we have private institutions. In a public institution, that intellectual property is part of the state, right? It's owned by the state. So it is very difficult to give an asset of the state to an individual, right? So a lot of times you're in a public institution, you're prevented from providing intellectual property. Just like I couldn't like give you my computer or my the school bus, that kind of thing. So you got some challenges there. But I'd say, and again, Nicole has probably experienced this as well, I'm sure that's an attractive route to go if that inventor wants to drive that innovation forward. Does that answer your question? And happy to dive into any more detail anywhere around there.
Yeah, and I'll say as well, one thing that we see at University of Colorado Boulder, and I also know some other offices, an alternative to that, what we do, since it's so early stage when an inventor decides, I want to spin off a company of the IP that I generated, and even though we would own it as the university, the company can get ownership through an option agreement. In our case, it's actually free for a year, and you can extend it to 18 months so that the startup gets to do customer discovery, figure out a product market fit while they are owning the IP under their company without needing to pay a license fee, or because they probably don't have the funds yet. So I find that the option agreements are a very effective mechanism to address this issue where, the startup company might just be so early, they want the ownership, but we can't give it away, but we can give them sort of an option, which is to borrow. And if they meet, and then, they need to meet certain milestones during that trial time to keep the IP, and then we can do the license negotiation. And one other point, and I know we're coming up on time, it's just because I don't see any other hands, otherwise I would have left it to anyone else, but there are also universities, including ours, that have special license agreements to startups. In our case, it's called licensing with ease. So we realize for a startup to be investable, we can't own 20% of the company as a university because that would be debt equity and nobody would want to touch it. So what we've done, and I've seen other institutions as well, Stephen, you have more data on this, seeing the sort of national perspective, but we have actually pre-negotiated license agreements specifically for startups in different industries. So life sciences, one type of terms, quantum or more tech software startups have their different terms. We vetted these agreements with venture capital firms and law firms to make sure that they're business friendly, and so that the companies take these licenses to their startups are really like so the cap table is attractive for somebody to come in and invest in the company. So there are mechanisms in the US that are kind of moving towards the inventor getting more control over the IP through these different sort of solutions. Excellent. Well, I feel like we could talk about this for probably another hour or so. Really, Stephen, really appreciate your time. I know you are busy and you travel and you have a lot of people, both in the government and institutions, that want your time. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise and knowledge today with our great community here at SIREUS. Thank you so much for the attendees. Thank you for the great questions. I really look forward to seeing you all soon again. We'll be hosting several of these SIREUS research forums throughout the spring. So, Stephen, maybe you want to come back and we can dive in deeper, or certainly continue these discussions and share best practices so we can move forward the tech transfer and research commercialization engine forward. With that said, thank you so much, everyone. We will be in touch with the next topics series here. take care. We will, see you soon. And we'll continue the discussions. If you want contact information to Steve, will we share your,
Please.
We'll follow up with contact information to both Steve and myself. If you have any questions, can jump on a Zoom or just, email back and forth. And if you can make it to San Diego, I really, really strongly recommend that event. Full immersion.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for the opportunity, and please let me know what I could do and Autumn could do to help support you. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.